Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for some more conversations. David Rubenstein is with us. David Rubenstein is a legendary private equity investor, a patriotic philanthropist, an amazing talk show host with his own program on Bloomberg TV, and now an author of 3 books. His latest book, just published, is entitled engagingly The American Experiment, a series of 31 interviews with leading Americans in which he covers our history, our values, our successes, and our failures. We're delighted to welcome David Rubenstein back to the program. Well, hi, David. Congratulations on your book, An American Experiment, which has become an instant bestseller. Now, this is the 3rd book in your trilogy. You had The American Story and How to Lead, really a great accomplishment. But I'd like to ask you, why is this book different from all the other books?
Well, this one is basically designed to give people a look at the country's beginnings, what the plans were at the beginning, and how we've tried to live up to those plans. And obviously, the efforts have failed in some cases, and in some cases, we still have struggles. But we had an incredible rhetoric in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution about what we were trying to do in this country, this experiment in representative democracy. And many times we have lived up to the experiment in terms of the goals, but many times we have not. And this really takes you through the failures and the successes of this experiment.
What did you mean by the American experiment? I mean, experiment, I think, is kind of a scientific procedure where you're testing something and it either succeeds or fails. I guess that's the analogy. But how does that relate to the American experience?
Well, the colonies were really creatures of England, and they really were creatures of Western Europe. And in those days, Western European countries were basically ruled by kings, and there were some parliaments. Obviously, in England, there was a parliament, but they didn't have as much power as parliaments do today or Congresses do. The king had a fair amount of authority. And what the founding fathers wanted to do was to create a new kind of system of government, which was a representative democracy with no king and no overruling parliament. They would have an executive, a parliament, or a Congress, but also a judiciary. And those 3 branches, which were created a kind of a separation of powers, it was an experiment to see whether we could have a government that would work for the people in this way. And that's why it was really a unique, I call the American experiment.
Now, do you think of our form of government as a democracy?
Well, democracy really means, in the ancient Athenian sense, everybody votes on everything. And obviously, when you have big populations, you can't have anything but a representative democracy. And so that's what we created, a representative democracy out of whole cloth. Nothing had ever been done like this before. There were revolutions later than the American Revolution where similar governments were set up. But before the American Revolution, there really had never been a situation where people came together and said, we're going to have a representative democracy. We're going to be freed of all ties of kings and aristocracies. And it was unique. And as Benjamin Franklin said at the beginning of the book, famously, when he was asked what we're creating, and he said, a republic, if you can keep it, what he meant was, it's not clear that a representative democracy could survive. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson, who was not part of the Constitutional Convention, he actually wrote to Madison and said, look, this might work for about 20 years. In fact, it wouldn't be a bad idea if every 20 years we changed the way the government is structured. Ultimately, Jefferson changed his mind. But the idea of this whole government being something new as an experiment was something that everybody recognized. It was different than anything that had ever been done before.
Well, in your business, Jefferson's statement might have been called a material understatement. But you dedicate your book, interestingly, to the public servants who protect our democracy. Why this dedication?
The greatest stress test of our representative democracy was the Civil War. And the Civil War was kind of baked into the Constitution when we agreed to allow slavery to occur. And ultimately, it produced the Civil War, and 3% of the population died in that Civil War, an incredible number of people. We've had other stress tests in our democracy. I would say Vietnam War was a stress test. I think Watergate was a stress test. But in the last 2 years, we had 2 stress tests. One was the enormous pandemic health problem that really stressed the economy and stressed the whole way our government works in terms of providing health care to people. But the other stress tests occurred after the presidential election, when President Trump basically said the election had been stolen from him. And then we had the events of January 6th. And in the events of January 6th, I felt that the judges who basically threw out all these cases really deserve some credit, because the judges basically were saying, look, we don't really think there's any evidence of fraud here, and we are going to be apolitical, and we're not political creatures. And they really stood up to a lot of pressure. And so did some of the election officials, some of the state election officials in, let's say, Georgia or Arizona, Pennsylvania. They were called and asked to kind of do some things that would help the president, and they resisted that because the facts didn't warrant it. So I really dedicated the book to the people who I think helped get us through this stress test of the election.
Well, in your book, you speak of American genes. Now, of course, we have 20 to 25,000 genes in our body, each of us, but you focus on about 13 genes, which you say are really the foundation of our government. Maybe you could speak to that.
The principle was this. Obviously, the body has many, many genes, thousands of genes. And I was trying to basically use an analogy of saying, well, what are the key genes of our body? Well, what are the key genes of our government? And I was in effect saying that our country, if you look at our country as a body, it has a number of genes, no doubt thousands of genes, but there were 13 or so that I thought were so unique that really made this country different than other countries. So if you were to go to New Zealand, or you were to go to Germany, or you go to Mongolia, there would be certain genes that bring everybody together, certain things that people have in common. Well, in our country, we have certain things that are part of our DNA now. Some weren't initially. For example, one of the genes now is diversity. We do believe that diversity is a plus. Generally, people believe that. People didn't probably believe that 250 years ago. But the genes are things like a belief in the right to vote, a belief in the value of democracy, a belief in the value of separation of powers, the rule of law, civilian control of the military, free speech. Those are the genes that I think are central to our core.
You referred to the events of January 6th and Trump's efforts to overturn the election. What do you make of the fact that most Republicans, polls say 60%, including many in Congress, 139 in the House, voted to overturn the Electoral College vote, and 8 in the Senate, including Senators Hawley and Cruz? What do you make of the fact that so many Republicans sided with Trump and think the election was stolen?
Under the theory of the big lie, if you say something as frequently and over and over again and powerfully, people will begin to say, well, somebody can't say something that's so powerful and so outrageous over and over again if it's not accurate. So surely it must be accurate. And so we've learned through history that people are able to convince large parts of the population that things that are not true are true. So in this particular case, I think President Trump was very forceful, and he convinced a number of people in the population, certainly a large percentage of Republicans, that the election was stolen. I think many members of Congress, if you talk to them privately, who publicly say that they believe that the election was stolen, privately they recognize it was not, but they just don't want to get on the bad side of Donald Trump, to be honest.
Well, your book presents an upbeat account of America and the prospects for the future. And I know you are essentially an optimist, particularly about America. You've contributed so much with your Patriotic Philanthropy to preserving the symbols of our institutions. But not everyone shares your optimism. Why are we so divided politically, and why are we so divided in our view of whether the American experiment has succeeded or failed?
Well, generally, people who have had some success in their life are probably optimists, because if you were a pessimist, you probably wouldn't get that many things done. You have to have a sense that you're going to be able to accomplish something and be optimistic. So I am an optimist by nature. I came from modest circumstances and I got lucky in my career. And so I guess I am an optimist. But why are we now in the situation you described? There are many factors. One, money is such an important part of politics. Now that members of Congress will do anything and spend so much time raising money. And when you raise money, if you're in the Republican, you raise it from the far right to a large extent, and you're a Democrat, you raise it from the far left. So people are kind of swung to the polar extremes. Social media has put an examination on everything members of Congress do, and they're afraid to be seen as bipartisan. bipartisanship is not very much in favor in Washington. You get very little bipartisanship in anything. So we are at the polar extremes. It's not very pleasant right now. We've been at worse times in our country's history. Obviously, the Civil War was worse, but I think we're going to need some real leadership or some other kinds of events that are going to pull people together. Right now, the lust for money and the lust for popularity on social media and other kinds of social exchanges is just pulling the country apart.
Now, you refer to racism as our birth defect, and I guess you refer to slavery and the Civil War and the systemic racism that seems to obtain today. Of the 31 people that you interview in the book, 4 are people of color, and they've all achieved a tremendous success in their fields. Danielle Allen, Mark Bradford, Henry Gates, Wynton Marsalis. And then there are 2 Latinas, Rita Moreno, and of course, Justice Sotomayor. And they rose to the top in their fields despite racism. How is this possible if we really are so bad on this issue?
Well, we had slavery when the country began, so that's as racist as you can get. We treated certain people because of their color of skin differently, and it's basically enslaved them for several hundred years. We ended that in 1865, but we still had racism, and there's nobody, I think, today who would say that those people who are born with color or of color have the same likelihood of success as people who are born who are white. I think that's self-evident to most people. That doesn't mean that everybody's a racist or that some people who are Black or African American, Latino cannot rise up, and obviously some do. But generally, if you look at people who are at the bottom of the economic and social strata, people that are part of our juvenile delinquency system, in our federal prison system, you see a disproportionate number of people who are minorities.
But I think you make the case, and indeed make the case in your own life, that whatever the circumstances are of your birth, if you're talented and have drive and a will to succeed, you're going to rise to the top in America, because this is the land of opportunity.
Well, the American dream was something I believed in when I was younger, which is that you come from modest circumstances. I did, you could rise up. But I have to admit, I was a man, not a woman. I was easier as a man. One, I was white and not Black, easier. I was Jewish, and there was obviously some discrimination, and still is, against people who are Jewish, but it's not the same as the discrimination that I think Blacks face in our country or other people of color face. And I got lucky too. You just have to look at the overall situation. If you are born in a one-parent family and you are raised by a single mother and you're African American and you're on welfare and food stamps, your chances of rising up are very, very small. It has been done for sure, and we feature these people because it's so unusual. But as a general rule of thumb, we don't see these people rising up to the same extent that people born in middle-class two-parent families rise up.
Now, is part of it something that doesn't have to do with racism, but has to do with the byproduct of our capitalist system? And I take it you support capitalism. I mean, it's been the mainstay. It supported you. Do you believe in the capitalist system? Do you not?
Well, as Winston Churchill famously said about democracy, it's the worst form of government except every other one. I would say that capitalism is the worst form of economic construct except every other one. Everybody who has risen up in the economic terms, in terms of countries, have really had some kind of capitalist system. Ours is a unique capitalist system, but China is to some extent now eliminating poverty because they relied a lot more on capitalism than they did on communism. And I think Western Europe is a case where you have a lot of capitalism. It's a different kind than our capitalism, but people have risen up and done quite well. So I think capitalism does leave people behind. One of its faults is that it does create greater economic inequality. And we've seen the great wealth being created in the last 20 years has left a lot of people behind. And that's one of the faults of the capitalist system. We try to deal with it through increased social safety nets, but obviously it's not adequate. If you walk around New York City any given time today, where both of us are, you'll see a lot of people who are homeless living in the streets. It's a sad situation, but that's the reality. So there are people left behind for sure in the capitalist system, and we've got to deal with it, but that doesn't mean the capitalist system should be thrown out.
Now, I think one of the 13 genes, in your view, is the rule of law. And of course, you were trained as a lawyer and you practiced law for a while before you became a capitalist. I wanted to ask you because one of your interviewees in the book is Sonia Sotomayor, who was, and she said some marvelous things about how you could make a difference as a lawyer and a judge. But also recently, since the abortion decision, she has said that American Bar Association, a fireside chat, said there's going to be a lot of disappointment in the law. Are you disappointed in the law? Disappointed in the Supreme Court?
Well, the Supreme Court is a very highly respected organization. Clearly, its popularity has gone down in recent years. Some say that stems from the time of Brown v. Board, where some people were very upset with what the Supreme Court did in 1954. Others would say it stems from Bush v. Gore in 2001, when the Supreme Court more or less gave the election to President Bush, or then Governor Bush. The Supreme Court is seen as more political than it wishes it would be. Justice Breyer, I interviewed him recently at the 92nd Street Y, and he has a book out that talks about the fact that the court is not political, but at least the justices don't think it is, but others do. There's no doubt that the Supreme Court will have to deal with the abortion decision, and it will not please very many people, in my view. The law of the land under Roe v. Wade is that abortion is permissible under certain circumstances. The law in Texas is now undercutting that, in my view. But in my own view about abortion is nobody is going to come up with a solution that will please everybody. But if Roe v. Wade is overturned, it will not eliminate abortion in this country. It will just make it more difficult for poor people to get abortions. Wealthy people are going to be able to fly to any state that allows abortion, and some states will. So it's really a question of allowing wealthy people or non-wealthy people to have abortions or not have them, in my view.
So were you yourself disappointed in the law as Sonia Sotomayor is?
Well, I think the law is not perfect. The law is never perfect. I think the law in this country is very important, and that's why we have so many lawyers, because we are a rule of law kind of country. And I would hate to be in another country that doesn't have laws which are observed as much as ours are. But there's no doubt that you can't please everybody. And what we've gone to in our country now is a system where so many difficult issues are not resolvable in the political system by Congress, so they kick them to the Supreme Court. The Congress tomorrow could pass a law outlawing abortion or allowing abortion, whatever they wanted to do. They could pass it, that'd be the law of the land. But obviously, it's not easy to do in Congress. So Congress allows the Supreme Court to resolve the thorniest social issues on the theory that they can't get enough votes to go one way or the other in Congress, but the Supreme Court has to make a decision, and ultimately it does.
One of the issues that could be resolved by Congress is the issue of immigration. And you interviewed Jia-Lin Yang, who's an expert on immigration. I mean, do you feel that we're in crisis in terms of our immigration system?
The United States freely let people come in the beginning. There was no passports or visas in the early part of the country. And then when people who were not Western Europe started coming, people from Asia, people from Southern Europe, people who were Jewish, we got constraints. From 1925 to 1965, we had a fairly harsh immigration system. We changed it in 1965. The system works reasonably well, except when people want to come in illegally. The illegal entry in the border, particularly in the South, is a gigantic problem. But the law itself was not designed to deal with illegal immigration, people coming from Mexico, from other Central American kind of countries. But the law itself is one that does allow people who are able to help this country become a better country. It does allow them to come in with relatively modest constraints. It's the illegal immigration, because people can't get in on the legal way, that's causing the big problem.
May we shift to your superb talk show, Peer to Peer, where you've interviewed so many interesting guests. I wish I could get the guests that you get. You get CEO after CEO. One of the people you interviewed, I remember, is he was then the wealthiest man in the country, now second wealthiest, and that was Jeff Bezos. And with the Rubenstein sense of humor, you said to him, you're the wealthiest man in the country. You just walk into a store and say, I'm Bezos, send me a bill, or do you use a credit card? So I turn the tables and ask you, do you use a credit card? You're one of the wealthiest men in the country.
Well, far below that, but I do use a credit card. I actually carry cash around for tips, but generally I use credit cards, and and sometimes they get denied, just like Jeff Bezos says his get denied sometimes. And, it's going to be embarrassing when you're getting your credit card denied and you're trying to pay a bill or something, but, you whip out another credit card and usually the second one will work.
And then you had a terrifically interesting interview with the CEO of Uber. He asked you whether you use Uber, and you said you didn't. He offered you a gift certificate. Do you use Uber nowadays, or are you still using some other means of transportation?
Actually, one time my staff put on my iPhone the Uber app, and I was proud to say I had it. I didn't know how to use it, but one time a car was supposed to pick me up. It didn't. All of a sudden, I started figuring out how to use it, and I used it once, and it would work perfectly. So I should probably use it more.
Now, you're a private equity investor. Did you invest in Uber early on? You might have done very well.
I didn't. I remember David Bonderman of TPG told me he was investing. I think it was at a $3 billion valuation. And I said, David, this company is so tiny, has hardly any revenue. But he said it was going up. Its revenue was going up 40% a month. And I didn't really know much about it then. I didn't use it. He was right. It turned out to be a great investment. As a public company, the current CEO has done some things to make it much better. So yeah, it's a good investment. I've missed a lot of investments in that area. I wish I had had the foresight. I turned down so many opportunities to invest in things that turned out to be great. But what can you do?
Well, now Uber has a $90 billion market cap. But let me ask you about the things you didn't invest in. You had the opportunity to invest in the Washington Post.
Yes.
And you turned that down. Why did you turn that down? Did you not want to own a newspaper?
Well, I thought the Washington Post would be great. Don Graham came to me and offered it to me and had three parts at the time: the newspaper, the real estate building in which it was operating, and an online company that was part of it. And I think he was proposing to sell it for roughly $650 million. And that struck me as a lot of money at that time. But the big problem was that everybody I consulted said the newspapers were going down the drain and I would be spending all my time firing people. So I didn't pursue it. Now, Jeff then bought it for $250 million. He didn't buy the online company and he didn't buy the real estate. It turned out that he's obviously a smarter guy than me, a better manager, more technology savvy, and he put a lot more money in than I could have put in. So he made it a great business. It turned out to be a wonderful investment for him. If I had bought it, it may not have worked out as well for me because I probably didn't have the skills he did.
Would you like to buy a newspaper today? I mean, newspapers are supposed to be the enemy of the people.
I've had chances since then, but it's a tough business, honestly. It's a very tough business today. I'm one of the few people that goes out and buys newspapers in the traditional way and still reads 5 or 6 of them a day. I don't see many people doing that.
Okay, maybe we talk about your patriotic philanthropy, which is legendary and extraordinary. You saved the pandas in the National Zoo. You reconstructed the Washington Monument when it was devastated by an earthquake. Redid Montpelier and Monticello. I mean, it's all phenomenal, David. What is your interest in doing this? What's your interest in patriotic philanthropy?
Well, I got lucky in my business career, so I have the ability to give back to society. I worked as a young man in the White House, and I do have a sense of history. And so most of my philanthropy, honestly, 90% of it goes to more traditional things like scholarships, education, medical research, things that people are probably more typically doing. This is about 10%, but it gets 100% of the attention because for whatever reason, people don't call up the head of the Park Service and say, I'll fix the Washington Monument or I'll fix the Lincoln Memorial or the Jefferson Memorial. I just think they feel people in the government should take care of that. So I've done that. It's something I'm proud of doing, but I would, and I encourage other people to do it. But again, I've gotten a lot of attention for it and I'm not upset with that. It's just my way of giving back to the country. But the way I give back generally is through philanthropy, and this is a part of it.
Of the 31 people you interviewed, and most of them are names that are on the tip of everyone's tongue, and others people who are perhaps less well known, but which one did you think was the outstanding interview? What stands out in your mind?
Well, that's like asking which of your children do you like the most. So I generally avoid.
Well, there's an answer to that question, but you may not want to publicize it.
Right. I would say that I like all the people that I interviewed equally. Some interviewees are better than others because some people are, more condensed in the way of talking, and some people have a sense of humor, and some people don't have a sense of humor. But in the end, what I try to do is put together a book which has a good cross section of the struggles this country has faced, with some of the people that lived through some of these struggles and some people that have written about them.
So I'll ask you the question, adapting it to you, that you asked Mark Bradford. What do you hope will be your legacy? You've done so many extraordinary things.
Well, I hope it will be that I did the best I could to give back to my country, that I helped to raise 3 children who are going to continue and be my legacy to some extent, and that I hope I inspire other people who come from modest backgrounds to try to do something with their lives and give back to society as part of their contribution to society.
Giving back to society. So, David Rubenstein, thank you so much for coming by. This has been such a fascinating interview. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Take care, be well, stay safe, and all the best.